if I didn't figure out who I was, my hockey career was going to end. It was already derailing quick. And number two, and more importantly, if I didn't figure out who I was probably going to end up dead.
Like, when do you really, really know, like, I know who I am, I'm just not talking about it with people? Like, when do you get clear on that?
I couldn't even say it to a therapist. I was so paranoid that people would find out that I was gay. My family knew, relatives knew, and I thought I was hiding exceptionally well from the hockey world. Then I got a phone call from a hockey mom. This mom calls me and says, "Brock, I want to set you up on a date." So I said to her, I said, "What's her name?" And she said, "Steve." And she said, "Brock, you're gay. How do you know this?" I was like, "It's over." But then I went, wait, all these cocky hockey bros know I'm gay and choose to work with me. How cool is that? I have this saying that normal doesn't exist. We're all a bunch of weirdos. And that's a beautiful thing. And the sooner we embrace our weirdness and things we like, the less likely we are to judge others for theirs.
Okay, cool. All right. We're excited to talk to Brock McGillis today. He's a professional hockey player. He's got a very interesting story, and I'm excited to talk to him. I've got a lot of questions. And Brock, welcome. Nice to have you.
Thank you for having me.
Absolutely. So why don't you start off, just give us some background. Give us a little background. And if you could touch too on your biggest influence early on in your life, just kind of just walk into like a little bit about your early childhood. Who had the biggest influence on you that kind of had an impact on you to the point where you have things that you carry with you today? And then kind of walk us into your athletic career.
Yeah, so a little bit about me, my story. I was a hockey player. I played in the OHL in Windsor and Sioux. I played professionally in the US in Kalamazoo and then over in Europe. And I played university hockey in Montreal at Concordia. And in 2016, I came out as the first openly gay men's professional hockey player. And since then, I did it for me. I did it to empower myself, but it's taken me on a whole new journey of life. I've become an advocate or activist, something along those lines, for the community, both in and out of sports. I've began a speaking career the last 6 or 7 years. I've been traveling across North America, speaking at schools, corporations, events, you name it, I've probably done it. I even did a show with RuPaul's Drag Race, like World of Wonder, on WOW Presents Plus, which is pretty cool. I guess growing up, my biggest influence was probably my dad. As a child, my nickname from my uncles and relatives was Velcro because I was always attached to him. And he had a profound effect on me. And as I got a little older, both my parents did. I mean, their work ethic, their drive, their determination was something that I really admired. They supported me and my brother through our sports endeavors and in our lives, school and everything else. And they're pretty incredible people, and they're my biggest cheerleaders today.
Beautiful. And what would you say is like one of the things that you have as a principle, something they taught you that really has stuck with you? I mean, they're your biggest influence. So can you give us an example of a way that they've influenced you that helps you carry yourself the way you do today?
There's nothing that you can't achieve. If you work hard enough and you push and you want it, you can achieve it. And I've always believed that. I mean, from being a professional athlete to the work I do now to this daunting tour that I've embarked on today, it's always been achievable. And it's always something that if I pushed hard enough, I can make happen. There's Muhammad Ali saying your will has to be greater than your skill, or will beats skill if skill doesn't work hard, is something along those lines. And my will and drive and determination has been there in everything I've done. And
I'm curious, how do they teach you that though? Is it just beating that concept into your head?
I think it was they didn't care if I failed at things. Like if I had a bad hockey game as a kid, or, I mean, I didn't really struggle in school, but hypothetically, if I had, it was all about how hard I worked. And if I worked hard enough, they were happy and they celebrated that. But if I didn't, they would push me. I remember being a kid and I was taking swimming lessons, and I was 6, 7 years old, and the teacher made us do laps or something. And I was done before all the other kids, and I was just kind of sitting there, and I just did it. And my dad looked at the swim coach and said, "You can push him harder than that. Like, look, he's just sitting there. Make him do more." And then when they said do more, I did it. And it was, there was a push and a drive, but it was always based off things that I was passionate about. And it was always, the conversation was always, as long as you want this, we're going to push you. If you don't, that's okay. But you need to figure out what you want. And if it's not this, then it'll be something else. And we will push you. But you have to want it and you have to work at it.
Very cool. How old is your brother?
My brother is 35. So he's
Okay.
5 years younger than I am.
Okay. And were you guys always in sports?
Yeah, we were both professional hockey players. So yes, yes. He was an exceptional hockey player. He had to retire due to injury. Likely would have made the NHL otherwise. And he became my best friend.
Wow.
Yeah, it was really interesting. When he was 15, he was playing junior hockey, which is very uncommon. Mostly it's like the youngest players are 16, but he was so talented at 15, they moved him up. And I was living away from home, but being 5 years older in junior hockey, the highest age, the oldest age is 20. So he was playing in our hometown with all my friends. I would come home for the holidays or after the season, and my little brother is hanging out with my buddies. And I'm like, this is kind of weird, but it was really cool actually. And we became best friends at that point, and from there on.
So from a 5 year difference, was it competitive or not really just because you had 5 years on him?
No, it was competitive. It was always competitive. I mean, I think it probably helped his career to have an older brother that was hyper competitive, that pushed really hard and challenged him, and he was so talented at sports that it also pushed me because my ego got in the way and I didn't want my kid brother to beat me at things, and he may have a few times, but I got him too. So
Very cool. Very cool. And real quick, so that people listening can understand the difference. When you say professional hockey player, and people who think NHL and they think that's all there is, how is it explained? How do you help me understand it?
I mean, there's a number of different levels. There's, the NHL is obviously the highest level, but there's levels just below it. And that's kind of where we were. He would have been at the highest if it wasn't for injury. Frankly, if I wasn't struggling, I'm sure we'll get into this, my sexuality and whatnot, I was ranked to be there as well. So we played tier or two below the NHL, and then I went over to Europe and he had to retire.
Okay. And how long has it been since you played?
Oh gosh. I think I retired in 2011 or 2012, somewhere in there.
And how old were you when you started?
6.
Wow.
Yeah.
That's great. Okay. All right. Well, so my brand is called Authentic Authority. So I was excited to talk to you because there could be nothing more authentic than what we're going to talk about, right? And it's such a different world today than it was when I was in college, and just how much has opened up about this topic. It's mind blowing. It really is. And it's not like that everywhere around the world. I mean, it's very specific to people's cultures and to people's communities and to people's, I mean, everyone has a different culture in itself, but let alone when you start throwing in things like spirituality and when you throw in things like community and family and friend, there's just so many different types of influences. So maybe we could just kind of go from the beginning, just walk me through like, when did you start to realize you were different? And for you, that was just going to be something that you were going to have to struggle through.
I remember my parents were watching a movie and I was like 6 years old, and I was sitting there with them, and I try and think back to what it was that they were watching. But there was a gay character, and trying to think around that time, like that would have been, I was 6, I was born in 83, so that's like 89, 90. So I assume it might have been like Philadelphia or something like that, because I can't really, I've tried researching which movies had gay characters in those years, but there was a gay character in the movie, and I just resonated with it right away. And I looked at my parents, I said, what if I'm gay? They said,
Wow.
if you're, yeah. And they said, if you're gay, you're gay. You're Brock. We love you. And that stuck with me throughout my childhood and through my life. But it was in the back of my mind because something else at the forefront, hockey. And growing up in a men's hypermasculine team locker room, one of the main things that's talked about is girls and women. And I realized really quick that I didn't really resonate or relate to what was being talked about. But what did impact me was the homophobic language I heard. I thought, I can't be gay. I can't play this sport and be gay. And that was probably in my early to mid-teens. I really realized that. And I went, what am I going to do? So I actually adhered to all the norms. I'm ashamed to admit this today, but I became a womanizing hockey bro. Like I adhered to all the stereotypes. And people in my life thought I had this incredible life. I was playing junior hockey. It's the elite level at that time. You're kind of like this little famous thing without actually being famous. Like you're a known person. I equate junior hockey to be like a YouTuber or an Instagram influencer where you have some notoriety or fame, but like you're still accessible to the public and you're still hanging out with your peers at school or going to parties and stuff. It's not like professional athletes, the highest level, they're kind of like Brad Pitt, right? They're not accessible to the masses. So I really adhere to the norms. I was cocky. I walked into a room like I owned it. I acted like I was a gift to the world. I mean, I'd be walking through malls with my friends signing autographs. I would get my friends into clubs, bypassing lines, no IDs at 16, 17 years old. Everyone around me thought I had this incredible life. What they didn't know is I go home at night and cry. I hated myself. Candidly, I wanted to die. And on more than one occasion in my teens, I tried to. Because of that language I heard daily in the locker room settings beat me down and made me feel like I couldn't be me. And my whole identity was based off hockey. You know, everyone around me. Like you go home for the holidays, every relative, how's hockey? You see parents of friends in the off season, how's hockey? You know, everywhere you went in the cities you were playing in, people asked you about hockey. So I wasn't Brock McGillis, a human being, this multifaceted, multidimensional person. I was Brock McGillis, hockey player, and I thought my other identity, being gay, would jeopardize all the work I did here.
So let me ask you a quick question. So I'm trying to get some context over this journey starts at 6 years old with a comment that kind of in the subconscious mind is like sitting there. And when you tell your journey and you're talking like what you were just talking about, when you think back, how old are you? When do you have the clarity? Like when do you really, really know, like, I know who I am. I'm just not talking about it with people. Like when do you get clear on that?
Well, it sort of happened in phases. At first, I suppressed it and I hated myself.
Right.
So I didn't even give myself the opportunity to explore or think about it. I just said, nope, you can't be that. You can't be that and do this. And then when I was 18, I started drinking heavily to numb it because it was coming up more and more. So I thought, if I'm, substances in me, I don't have to think. From 18 to 23, I drank every single day.
And how did that impact, or where was the influence on sports, and how much did it change things?
It ruined my career.
Right.
I mean, I was on NHL draft list. I was supposed to have this linear trajectory to the NHL. Then I had season-ending injuries every year. I wasn't sleeping. I was depressed, suicidal, and drinking.
Wow.
So
Did you go to therapy?
I would see therapists off and on, but I would lie to them. I couldn't even say it to a therapist. I was so paranoid that people would find out that I was gay
Right.
that I would lie to them. Even so, at 23, I sat myself down. I was playing in the minors in Europe, and I had gone from supposed to be in the NHL to now I'm in the minors in Europe. And I'm like, what happened? And I sat myself down. I said, man, you need to figure this out, because I knew two things were about to happen. Number one, if I didn't figure out who I was, my hockey career was going to end. It was already derailing quick. And number two, and more importantly, if I didn't figure out who I was probably going to end up dead.
And did you have spirituality in your life at any point?
I grew up Catholic. I grew up in the church, which, I mean, at that point in the church, even still today, it's not always the best place to be gay. um, I found spirituality later. I found my own form of something, and that's happened more recently as I got older through meditation and different avenues and courses I've taken. But at that point, I was just hockey in survival mode.
You know, it's funny. I'm part of a leadership program that I've been doing for over a decade, and part of it we call our whip. Our whip is our worldview. It's what we believe, and then the I is the identity piece, and it's probably one of the most misunderstood pieces because it's the hardest thing in the world to do is to become yourself and to know who you are. And because we identify ourselves as a hockey player or an entrepreneur, and that ends, you know, you're not left with much if you don't know who you are. And so, and people in our program would always question, like, well, what does that mean? Is it what I am today? Is it what I want to be? Is it what I want? And people are, it's incredible watching people go through this journey of trying to figure out their identity. And yet, like, you knew it. And then you were dealing with the integrity gap of like this tension of living a certain way yet believing what you who you were, and you weren't able to live it that way. And they always say that the way to live a meaningful life is to live aligned with your beliefs, with who you are, and then you can feel fulfilled. And so here you are fighting that like crazy. And it's interesting because I didn't even really think about, you think about someone who didn't get to the highest level of the NHL, and to hear you say that you kind of self-sabotaged it, and it's
Totally.
yeah.
I think it was I think all the injuries were psychosomatic. I think that played into it. I think at times it was a relief when I was injured,
Right.
because then I wouldn't have to be in the locker room and hear what I heard daily. I wouldn't have to be beat down. I wouldn't have to play this character. Like, I've realized later in my life, I was an actor.
Did Was it daily? Wow. And anyone ever suspect it? Anyone ever call you out?
No, because again, I'm ashamed to admit it, but I was a womanizer.
Right. You were like a master, like
I I became all the stereotypes you think of with like a professional athlete.
right.
And and it wasn't until I was 23 that I decided, all right, I need to figure this out.
Was it just like a flip switch for you?
I just sat down one day and well, something happened I don't really share a lot of. I checked this is pre-apps. But I checked a website and I looked at, it was like Gaydar or something, and I could check different cities, and I checked a city in Canada where I knew people, and I saw a lot of men who were adults, probably 40s up, who were closeted and married to women. And I went, that's going to be me. And listen, I don't judge anyone. I was younger than them. They grew up during a different time. I don't, maybe their spouses know, like, that's none of my business. But I thought about it and I said, well, I didn't grow up during a time where it was illegal to be gay. I didn't grow up, where I'm living in the midst of the HIV/AIDS epidemic. I can't, in good conscience, end up with a wife and kids and then be on websites or apps, because I have sexual urges and desires because I'm actually a gay man. So I thought, you need to figure this out. So between knowing I'd probably end up dead, my hockey career going downhill, and that, I just said, it's time.
And that was 23.
I was 23 years old.
Who's the first person you talked to?
So I'm from Sudbury, Ontario, which is a small town. Well, it's about 100,000 people, about 4 hours north of Toronto. But I didn't want anyone there to know because I was a known person. Hockey is everything in that city. So I went to Toronto and I went on a date with a guy. Instantly, I was like, yep, you're gay. I knew. I was like, this is it. And honestly, initially, I was so relieved because I had now accepted myself.
Right.
And I was like, my career's going to get back on track. And obviously, my mind went to hockey because that's still my identity. My career's going to get back on track. I'm going to make the NHL. Everything's going to go the way it was supposed to. But it got worse because now I wasn't suppressing it. I was in the closet. I was hiding it. And I started dating that guy. I actually dated him for 3 years without a soul in my life knowing.
Wow.
Not a friend, not a family member, nobody. And we actually had an alias that we used so that his friends wouldn't find me on social media and figure out I was a professional hockey player and potentially jeopardize my chances of making the NHL.
Wow.
Yeah, it was quite intense.
So 3 years, and then how long did you play? How old were you when you stopped playing hockey?
I was 28 or so, 20, yeah, about 28.
So then there's another 2 or 3 years after you're dating that first guy.
Yeah, well, I kept having injuries and I decided to take a step back and I went to school. And I went to university in Montreal at Concordia, but I decided to play on the hockey team there just in case I got my life figured out and I could take another crack at the NHL because that was still my focus. I was zeroed in on making it. And I told him, listen, I might have to go on dates with women because I was injured for a little bit before, so I could get away with not adhering to the norms. But I told him, I said, I might have to do that. I hope you're okay with it. And he wasn't, which I completely understand. And I was like, well, we have to break up. So that relationship ended and I went to school and I played for 2 years, but had more injuries. So I was dealing with so much, had a couple of knee surgeries and decided that was the end of hockey.
Okay. So then who's the first person you talk to after when you come out?
Well, at that point, one night I was watching a hockey game on TV and there was this young guy being interviewed while I was at school. And his name was Brendan Burke. And Brendan is the son of Brian Burke. And Brian Burke was the president and GM of the Toronto Maple Leafs. He's ran the Calgary Flames, the Vancouver Canucks, Pittsburgh Penguins. He worked for the league for a while, the NHL, and now he's one of the people in charge of the women's professional league. And Brendan was talking about following in his father's footsteps and making the NHL as general manager. And I wasn't really paying attention to the interview. I was doing some schoolwork. And then he said something that really caught my attention. He said, and I'm gay. And my head whipped around and stared at the TV because I was in shock. I'd never heard somebody say they were gay in hockey. The only time I ever heard the word gay in hockey was when one player was calling another player gay in the locker room or on the ice. Hockey world's a pretty small place. So I reached out to Brendan that night and we instantly became friends. And I came out to him.
Wow.
And it was such a relief to have somebody I could talk to about being gay and hockey and the duality of the two. And beyond that, I could talk to about my breakup because the only thing worse than dating somebody for 3 years without a soul knowing is breaking up with them and nobody knowing why you're sad or upset or not yourself. And I think it was great for him too, because he had this hockey family and then he had gay friends, but he had nobody who understood the duality like I did. We had this unique bond and connection. Then one day he sent me a text message and it said, I can't wait for the day that you're out to your family like I am to mine.
Was that, by the way, when he called that out on TV, was that the first time he ever told, like, that was like his public announcement?
That was his public announcement. His family knew, he had gay friends, but he came out openly as somebody in hockey working on the
way. That's an interesting way to do it.
I think because his dad is so high profile in the sport, and because he wanted to follow in the footsteps of his father and make it in that capacity. And I think he was tired of living in secret
Right.
in that world. So he came out publicly and we talked every day.
You know, it's
And
interesting as I hear your story, I can't help but think like it's interesting that you didn't talk to your parents, because your parents who unconditionally love you and have the biggest influence on you and told you in the back of your mind, you could think back like all these times where you were struggling, that you knew your parents would still love you. Was it ever like tempting to like just let it out to your parents?
Totally. It was. In fact, one day Brendan sent me a message and he said, I can't wait for the day that you're out to your family like I am to mine. And I ignored his message. And it wasn't because I didn't think my family would be inclusive or supportive. It was the fact they were so involved with hockey. Both sides of my family, my mom's side and my dad's side, were really immersed in hockey in different capacities. I had relatives that played high levels. I had cousins who were playing pretty high level. I had relatives coaching in the sport and whatnot. And then my own family, my brother was a first round pick in the OHL, played professionally. My dad coached AAA and junior hockey for 30 plus years. And I was afraid that my family, those people in my life, if they knew I was gay, they'd become more sensitive to the language used in locker rooms. And that would cause them to stand up against it, which in the process, they may, in a heated moment, accidentally out me and jeopardize any shot I had. So I ignored Brendan's message. Those ended up being the last words Brendan ever said to me. 2 days later, he passed away in a car accident.
Wow.
So I was sitting in Montreal, and the first person I ever loved, I just broke up with, and now my only friend who knows my life has passed away. And I felt like I needed to honor the friendship and what it meant to me and how impactful it was on my life and my journey. I kept going back to our texts, and the last one just stuck out to me. And at that point, I decided to come out to my family. I sat my brother down first and told him, and he's like, yeah, so. And then I told my family and all my friends who were involved in hockey.
Wow. So tell me the reaction you got from everyone else outside your family.
Everyone in my life that I told at that point was great, but I didn't come out in the sport at that point. And it's interesting, as a queer person, you're always coming out. Whenever I enter a new space, and it's a little different now because I do a lot of media and I engage with a lot of things. So a lot of people may know already, but there's always that interesting aspect of being like coming out and telling people, and I stayed closeted in hockey at that point because I just retired. I moved back to Sudbury and I started working with athletes. I was doing off-ice training, on-ice skill development with players. And I had 2 or 3 businesses in the sport, and I'd grown them to the point that I was working and had a team working with like 100 players a day in short order. And I was afraid that the older players, if they knew I was gay, wouldn't want to work with me, and that the younger players, that their parents wouldn't want them to work with me, because the reality is there isn't a ton of exposure to the LGBTQ plus community in Northern Ontario. So I hid it. And for about 5 years, I thought I was doing a great job. Like I was in relationships. I had a partner at that point I was living with, and like my family knew, relatives knew, and I thought I was hiding exceptionally well from the hockey world. Then I got a phone call from a hockey mom. And working with 100 players meant a lot of phone calls from hockey parents. Hockey parents are a unique breed of human. They're interesting. This call was different though. This mom calls me and says, Brock, I want to set you up on a date. And I went, uh-oh. Like, what do I do? How do I get out of this? And initially I was thinking of the excuse. And then I started thinking, well, I wonder what she thinks my type is. So I said to her, I said, what's her name? And she said, Steve. And I said, what? And she said, Brock, you're gay. And I started saying, I don't know what you're and I couldn't even finish the sentence. And she's like, you're gay, Brock. You're really gay. I was like, how do you know this? My son told me, her son's 15 at the time. She's like, all the boys know. They've known for
Wow.
years.
Wow.
Yeah. My heart started racing. I broke into a sweat. I was like, it's over. These businesses I've been building for 5 or so years, they're all done.
What year is this?
2015.
Okay.
I was like, it's over. They're gonna leave. They're gonna go train somewhere else. How am I gonna pay my bills? How am I gonna pay the people working for me? Like, what am I gonna do? But then I went, wait, all these cocky hockey bros know I'm gay and choose to work with me in Sudbury, Ontario, where there isn't a ton of exposure to the LGBTQ plus community. How cool is that? And I thought, well, maybe I should come out to them. But then I said, nah, you know what? I'm going to do a little sociology experiment. So I realized something. They know I'm gay, but they don't know that I know that they know that I'm gay.
Right.
I could observe them, kind of like animals in the wild, hockey players in their natural habitat. And I started to recognize that anytime they said something homophobic, they'd freeze up and apologize to me. And shrug and nod and just keep going with things. After a while, I started thinking, maybe we're creating a shift here. We have this insular world and we have this little bubble within that world. Maybe we're creating a shift. And then I thought, or maybe they just like me. I present masculine, I out bench press them, I go on the ice and beat them at hockey and chirp them, and like maybe they like me. But maybe
and that can make a big difference, right? Because if they can't do that stuff, then they feel like they can almost have an authority over you, right? So like
totally. And then beyond that, I adhered to a lot of the norms still. Like I presented masculine. Like if I was a feminine presenting gay guy, maybe they wouldn't have felt the same way. If I was trans, maybe they wouldn't have felt the same way. If I was overtly bringing a partner around and affectionate, maybe they wouldn't have felt the same. I didn't know.
Right.
And then one day I wasn't there and I had a sprint coach working with some of my athletes on a track. And at the end of a 2-hour workout, he told them they had 10 more 200-meter sprints. And one of the younger players, who's like 16, looked at the sprint coach and said, this is so gay. I can't believe you're making us do this. And an older player who's playing major junior, about to embark on a career in the sport, looked at the younger player and said, we don't say that here. Give me 50 push-ups. And that became something my athletes adopted amongst themselves.
Wow.
To hold themselves accountable, to break the habits, but also hold each other accountable. And then because they are these influencers in their communities, they took it to their peers at school, their teammates, and different people. And before I knew it, people I didn't even know were doing push-ups anytime they said something homophobic. In fact, the younger player, one night, one of his teammates I've never met was on FaceTime with his girlfriend. And girlfriend said, let's hang out. And the teammate said, no, I can't, I have practice. And she said, that's okay, you never want to hang out with me. And he looked at her and said, give me 50 push-ups right now or we're breaking up. And they both dropped down and did 50 push-ups. And that was the moment that I realized we could create shifts. That was like the aha moment.
We or you?
They created a shift first.
They did, but if you're a catalyst the way you are, and because your situation is very unique, and it's so distinctly different than people who've been in your shoes, right? That it's hard to say that everybody could have done what you did or what you're in your story, what you're doing here, because and even what you're doing now with this tour, because I want you're confident and you've got the likability factor, you're a nice guy, but you have that that differentiator. You do. The fact that you can still go out and kick those kids' butt. The fact that you can, that's a big deal. And coming up as an athlete myself, never being around a situation like yours outside of my work, because in work I have, I can't relate. I wouldn't be able to say I can relate, because I don't know. And but I know that but common sense tells you it's a differentiator. So I
Yeah.
asked you that because I'm wondering how much responsibility do you take to make that shift? And do you feel like you are like it's on your shoulders, like you have a big responsibility?
Now I do, but I think they created a shift too. And I think big or small, like that one player telling the other player, give me 50 push-ups, made me realize the shifts I could create.
Right.
So his shift may have been small, but it had a ripple effect. And I
Sure.
think shifts big or small do, and we never know the impact they have. Without him doing that, maybe I don't realize the shifts I could create. Maybe I continue running hockey businesses in Northern Ontario for the rest of my life. I don't know. So I have to give him some credit there because, yeah, I was creating a shift in them just by existing, but they were also creating a shift in me. And when he did that, there's a ripple effect from that. That's why I'm talking to you right now.
Yeah, and 100%. And I think the difference, and I think where I was trying to go with that is that the catalyst to the ripple is one
Oh,
thing. Because like almost unconsciously, I'm just doing what I feel is the right thing. Like, hey, sit, go do 50. But now, like when you take it to a whole new level and you start touring and you start like taking that magnum opus within you to say, no, like now, now I'm going to really leverage this, right? Because that's what you're doing.
yeah. And I think now, like, yeah, I see myself as a shift maker. I see myself as, somebody trying to pave a path, lead a way, something incredibly unconventional. I've never seen it done the way I've been doing it. Um, and I do, and it is like you asked if it was, like if I put weight on my shoulders and whatnot. And yeah, I mean, I have people in my DMs regularly who are struggling. I've been able to help people get, who are self-harming and on the brink of death support. And I had one kid come to me and like I've had a number of people where I've gotten them support and worked with their families, especially young people, to get them the help they need and to be that shoulder and ear and lend my experience. But this one kid saw me on my show with RuPaul's Drag Race, and he reached out, and his family was, on the brink of kicking him out because they found out he was gay. And I've been a resource, somebody he could talk to, support system. And he ultimately went on finishing college now. He's feeling better, more confident, comfortable in himself. And he messaged me about a month ago, and he asked me if my partner and I would come to his college graduation. Because he's like, my parents aren't coming. Will you two come? And that was pretty, like, I can, with a lot of the stuff I do, like I have to detach myself from the stories I hear, because initially early on it took a toll. It brought me back to a dark place. But this one was like so feel good in a sense that, like, recognizing the impact I've had with him, and for him to be like, can you come watch me graduate?
That's your question. So when I hear your story, and I'm not going to take anything away from your story, but like your story can be applied to anyone who's different, that is hiding who they really are, right? This really doesn't have as much to do about like the what, like what you're coming out with, because I could give you 100 stories that I know of, and I have one, my personal one, and the strength that I know it takes to be able to overcome the fear of what people are gonna think and say and treat you could be applied to anything that makes you distinctly different from everyone else around you, right? So I'm wondering, like, talk to me really quick because I don't want to run out of time, but when it comes to leadership and when it comes to being a leader, how do you define leadership and how did it change from in the hockey world of leadership? I mean, if you could just touch on like what was leadership like from the hockey perspective and from a coaches and from a team, and then now your leadership role in a kid's life like that, the influences you have, has it changed? Just talk to me about like the role of leadership in your life.
Yeah, I think to your initial point, my story is a gateway to talk about inclusive spaces and being yourself and breaking barriers of conformity, and it transcends LGBTQ plus. It can pick the topic,
Right.
but it's just the gateway to get into that deeper conversation. In terms of leadership, I think in sports, you can do whatever you want, and then it's what you do in the locker room, and it's either being that vocal leader or that hard worker on the ice, etc. I think my role now has changed to the point where, like, I when I was an athlete, I could go do goofy things all day or like go out and do stuff, and now it's like, well, I have to be sort of on.
Yeah.
I'm always on because everywhere I go, people come up to me. Like I'm in Vancouver on tour, and I went to a nightclub one night with some friends and a person who's working on tour with me, and people came up to me, "Are you Brock?" And I'm like, "Oh, this is different." Okay. So I have to recognize that everywhere I go. And then working with youth, what I post, how I engage on socials, the example I set everywhere has really changed. And I want to be that example for them. I want to be that person that they look to and go, "Oh, this is how he navigates this." But also being an ear and a support and somebody they can come to and confide in and trust. Whether it's, I've had 70-year-old adults all the way down to like 14, 13-year-olds. And being there, and not even just gay, like just somebody who needs somebody to talk to. And that means I'm on. That means, and sometimes it's combative. It's people who disagree with me and my life and everything. And it's engaging in those conversations to hopefully guide people to listen. I'll never change how people feel about the LGBTQ plus community, but if I can get them to critically think about why they feel the way they feel, then maybe we will spark some growth and evolution, and we will see some progress. So it's about, to me, leadership now is about being self-aware at almost all times, being a resource and leading by example. And that's pretty similar to sport. But being a confidant, being somebody they could come to, and then being a pillar and doing things that they've never seen to hopefully inspire them.
You see yourself as a leader?
Yeah.
Have you always?
I think there was a time in my life when I was in survival mode, and at that point, not so much. I think when I was younger, I definitely was, and I think now I am. I think it's who I was always meant to be.
One thing I've learned about leadership, especially when you are successful as a leader, is that you can feel very alone.
It's
Very alone.
incredibly isolating.
And now that, and because you're on the spotlight, because you're always on, one mistake and they'll shoot you in the back.
And people look for it.
Of course. It's the easiest thing to do is to call out the leader. I mean, like, why not? Like, so when it comes to business and when it comes to sports, and when it comes to communities, that role is a we joke around. We say, don't want to be a leader, because if you want to, be ready to have some pain and suffering, because it sucks being a leader. You lead anything and you got pain coming, because it's hard. You're passionate about what you believe in. So I wonder in my brain, like, as you do your tour, and as you pick up steam, and as you become more of a figure that a lot more people are going to look up to, because you have this distinctness about you that I think will draw people to you, and you have a strong confidence now about it. And I wonder, finding yourself in a place where you feel alone. Hopefully you won't, because you'll have a lot of people. But like when push comes to shove and someone's got to be the one standing up, I just wonder, like, do you think about that? Is that even a problem for you? Or do you have so many people that rally with you that it's just not going to be an issue for you?
No, it's already happened.
Has it?
Yeah, of course. I mean, I get attacked as much online from queer people as I do from people that are anti-LGBTQ plus.
I was going to ask you, like, your experiences. Did you have a lot of bad experiences afterwards? Like, do people still? I mean, now are you experiencing hard stuff?
I mean, we know how polarizing things are right now, especially in America
Right.
and with the community. And yeah, I mean, it's sort of toned down a little bit recently, which is great, but there was a long period of time I was probably being called a groomer on the internet about 100 times a day. And then on top of that, if I said something like that a queer person didn't like, they would lash out at me. So I was like, well, the community I'm trying to support and push for gets upset with me, even if I've done something that is like not even
Right.
like a cancelable offense or anything in that regard. But just and a friend of mine explained it to me. She said, Brock, when I'm really struggling or upset, I take it out on my mom. She's like, for a lot of these people, you're that figure. And
Do you think people know why they don't like you? Or do you think, like, I'm Jewish and I'm very religious, and people want to kill me and they don't even know me. It's a
I
crazy
get
thing.
those too. I get those too. Yeah.
So it's a weird thing, right? And like, I worked with a lot of people who were gay, and I had people comfortable enough in our culture that they came out to us at work, which was
Sure.
very unique and very. And I have to say, some of my best employees ever. And I was very close with them because the trust, and I don't know what it is. I mean, again, I have no context, and I don't pretend like I do. I don't, but I don't care. Like for me, it's like, you are you. And so our core values were to be distinct and deeply connected. So, you could be you, I could be me, and that's cool. And I don't push it on you. You don't push it on me. It doesn't matter if it's religion, doesn't matter if it's whatever it is. And for me, it's hard because I don't understand why more people can't be like that. Because why do you care what someone else, how they're living their life, right? Like everyone's different and unique in their own way.
I have a theory because they're not living authentic. And to your point earlier, they aren't self-aware and they haven't figured out who they are
Sure.
because it's easier to not. And then you lash out on others who
Right.
are,
It makes you feel better for sure. Right.
because there's some resentment there that this person is living authentically. They are their true selves and they're happy in their skin.
Right.
I when I talk to queer people, I tell them, I say, stop looking for, I hate the word acceptance. Only you can accept you. For others to accept you creates a hierarchy that they're above you, and we're all equal. So, and if we take away that thing and you recognize that self-acceptance is what matters, you will be happier because you're not going to care what other people think about you. And to your previous question, I don't care what anyone thinks about me. Am I isolated and alone at times? Yeah, I have a tight core group I keep around me. I keep my therapist on speed dial and I meditate daily and I do enough self-care to make sure that I'm stronger than anything that comes at me.
You care. You get, I mean, look, you're human. You mean we always say care, but not that much. But like, you care.
Do you know what changed it for me? I had somebody calling me the most vile things and threatening to kill me and this, that, and the other on social media. And I messaged them. I said, what would make you think that this is okay to say to somebody? And he broke down and told me he had been sexually assaulted by both of his parents growing up. And he was really struggling. And it changed my perspective on people lashing out at me. What I actually started doing, especially in the midst of the pandemic, is if queer people or marginalized folks would lash out for anything, it could be something that didn't even, but they would direct it towards me. I DM them with a Zoom link. I'd be like, okay, say it to my face. Let's have a conversation. And we would have conversations and it would lead to spaces where it was like, oh, Brock isn't that bad. Or maybe he's not what I thought he was because they have a perception of me. I'm a masculine presenting gay man who, you know, has a lot of privilege. So they assumed XYZ. And then when they get to know me and understand who I am, and I can't do that with everyone and I don't care to, but it was just at that time when we were all at home, it was easy to do.
Right.
But ultimately, I now have some empathy for those folks who lash out at me because I think of that person and I'm like, I wonder what this person's going through.
Right.
And it changed the way I thought about.
Everybody's struggling with something.
That's my point. So it changed the way I thought about anyone attacking me. So do I care? I care about them. I want them to feel better. It sucks that people feel that way and feel the need to do that for, some sort of attention or to get the attention of a person or to feel something.
Right.
That makes me sad. It breaks my heart. But the names they call me, that's a screen. I don't care.
All right, I gotta ask you. So again, comes from ignorance and no context. But when you use the word queer, I don't even know what if you say gay, help me understand what and it sounds like a bad word.
It can be used as a slur, most definitely. But I think it's been reclaimed by the community. Like queer liberation was something that was used in the 50s and 60s and 70s as part of the movement, and it would be like more all-encompassing of the entire community.
Okay.
So I use it instead of saying LGBTQIA2S plus every time I talk. It's just easier to say queer. It's just,
And when it comes to the whole transgender and this whole debate, do you see it all in the same conversation? Because it doesn't, for me, when I hear you talk, it doesn't feel like it is. It feels like it's a completely, I mean, it feels like what we talked about before, which is it's one of those other things that make you very distinctly different, right? And struggling, but it doesn't feel like it's like when I hear your story and I've talked to like my employees who've gone through similar stories, feels very different. But when you talk, you don't separate that, do you?
I think struggle with sexuality or gender identity is predominantly internal, right? You have to come out with it. Nobody knows until you come out with it.
Right.
So all the expression you experience is internalized, which is really tough. And then on top of that, our families, most marginalized communities have families that come from that same community. LGBTQ plus people, that's not right. Normally, that's not the case. It's very seldomly that it is the case that you have queer parents, right? So you don't have people in your life that can guide you through your oppression.
Right.
So as a Jewish person and you experience anti-Semitism, you likely, not for sure, I mean, people are adopted, different things, but you likely have Jewish parents.
Right.
They've experienced that same oppression, whereas we don't. And ours isn't, nobody knows we're queer. So I think there's some similarities in the sense that all of our struggle is internalized until we come out with it.
Right.
And then we experience a different type of oppression from society. But do I know the experience of a trans person? No. Can I have empathy for them based off the fact that, people will say trans isn't real or it's this or that or the other. And or they don't understand trans. Well, people say that about gay people. So I can have empathy for them and try and be a support and talk to them because some of the experiences are similar, but also there's a lot that are vastly different.
Right. Right. So let's wrap up with you telling me kind of about the tour. So tell us a little bit about the details, what you're doing, and the message you want to send out there, and we'll wrap things up.
So I decided to, I think I'm a bit of a masochist. and decided to do a tour across Canada and hopefully the US next year, where I'd go to 100 hockey teams in 100 days across the country.
Wow.
Yeah. We're a week in. I feel like I haven't slept in a week, and I'm really excited for the holidays so I can just sleep for a week in between stops. But I did it this way intentionally to draw attention. I want people to see it. I want it to be impactful. I want it to be daunting. And I want it to challenge myself the same way my parents would or my dad would when I, was at the swimming lessons as a kid. And I've never seen it done. So I said, all right, let's do this and let's bring awareness and let's create. And again, like we talked about, my story is a gateway. My story is a gateway to talk about welcoming spaces, and everything I talk about is transcends LGBTQ plus. It's the same principles relate to racism,
Right.
misogyny, ableism. Pick the topic, mental
Yep.
health. They can all be applied, but I just use my story to humanize impact, and then from there, the solutions can be applied to other groups. So year one, we're doing across Canada, we're doing NHL cities, and then hope year two will expand to other parts of the country, and then do an entire US tour the same way, and really use hockey as a gateway to make society more welcoming. Hockey has such influence on Canadian culture that it can, and it's already shown. I got, if we have a second, I need to read you part of a message I got because it was so incredible. This parent we're in Vancouver for our first stop, and I got this message from a parent, and it said, my son is 16 and plays hockey. He had been telling me about you and your story that he heard on a podcast last week. Last night, he heard from some of his friends that you spoke with another club, and he was so excited. One of his friends told him that you've changed the way he sees the world and thinks you've changed his life. And then I reached out and we scheduled something with her son's team. And it was so cool and powerful, and it brought chills and almost tears to my eyes, because we can do this, and we have fun while we do it. This doesn't have to be this most rigid, serious thing. Like, we can have fun and enjoy the process and learn and grow and evolve together. And they can ask the wrong questions, they can make mistakes, and we can talk about it. And I think that's how we evolve the world. I think when we become too polarizing, we're pushing people away from things, and we need to call them in, not call them out.
Beautiful, man. Have you had people not interested in having you come to their team?
I've had some players whose parents decided that this wasn't for them. But I
Normal.
have to say the response has been incredible. The day we announced, my management received over 100 teams requesting to book me. And we had already been scheduled. So we might end up doing close to 150 in the 100 days.
How are you, and I'm just curious, professionally, career-wise, are you still, do you generate income from hockey, from coaching, from camps? So what do you do? Do you have full, I mean, are you taking a time off to do this full time?
Oh, this is my job.
Wow.
I speak for a living. I speak at corporations, schools, events. I travel around, and I speak and share and humanize and engage with people.
Wow.
That's become my career.
Become your identity.
Part of it. I've learned that I have this saying that normal doesn't exist. We're all a bunch of weirdos, and that's a beautiful thing. And the sooner we embrace our weirdness and things we like, the less likely we are to judge others for theirs. And my identity is so multifaceted. I like so many different things, but this is a big part. And somebody asked me one time, they said, how do you feel that your whole identity revolves around being gay? And I said, well, I mean, you don't realize it, but your identity as a straight person revolves around being straight. So it's just, I'm putting it out there now because it's so different than what, mainstream traditional society does.
Right.
So the world was created with a straight lens. And now I'm just doing, people live and they're asked every day. If you're straight, you're probably asked about a girlfriend growing up. And then if you're a straight guy, or a boyfriend, if you're a straight girl, and then you become an adult, they're like, when are you getting married? When are you having kids? Well, that's all heteronormativity. That's
Yeah.
all straight culture.
Yeah.
So I'm just living and doing what straight people do all the time.
Well, if there's one thing I can say I learned about you, you may not have started off as the most authentic dude, but you definitely are now. You are definitely an authentic human being that I could see you've been building strength. And look, I wish you nothing but the best with this culture shift tour. I think it will resonate with a lot of people, and I think you will definitely be able to have an impact on a lot of people. And I believe that like everyone's destined to do their thing, and you're distinctly different for a reason, and you've come a long way. That journey is not easy, and I could feel your pain just because I know how hard it is to feel like you're alone, and I gotta give you a lot of credit for that. So I think I really want, first off, I appreciate you coming on here and talking to me about it and being so open. Again, wish you nothing but the best. How can people find you, hear more about you, connect with you? Like, how do people do that with you?
Yeah, thank you so much for the kind words. They can find me if they want to follow the tour. It's brockmcgillis.com/tour. They want to follow me. We're posting regularly. I guess I'm doing social media now. On Instagram at Brock McGillis 33, and same with TikTok and Twitter, or X. So Brock McGillis 33 on all social media platforms.
Cool, cool. And I'll put that in the article and everything. And we'll make sure we add that in. All right, my friend. Thank you so much for meeting with me. I hope you had a nice Thanksgiving with you and your family, and best of luck on this tour. And yeah, I really appreciate you coming on.
Thank you, and thank you for amplifying the message. Truly appreciate it.
Okay. All right. Take care. Have a good one. Okay. We'll talk soon.